Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 7 of the Ecce textbook. And in this chapter you're going to see that the grammar involves plural direct objects, right? So you kind of rebooting your noun endings and making sure that you understand the difference between nominative and accusative, the three declensions or groups of nouns, and in particular we're going to look at third declension, the plural nominative and plural accusative, because they're using the same es ending. So it can be a little bit confusing. So you want to make sure that you've kind of got that under control. So that would be my first suggestion to you. Make sure that you have the vocab. As always, read through the vocab list, make sure you've memorized it as best as you can, and then move on to the grammar. Read through it, make sure you can kind of see it in context with some practice problems, whatever you need. And if you want some help with that, feel free to take a look at my chapter 7 grammar video where I cover a lot of this stuff. But you want to make sure that you have that kind of under control so that when you come back and read this story, you're able to see the grammar in action, and it'll kind of contextualize it for you and make sure that you can translate it correctly. So once you have that and you're ready to roll, you want to read this story out loud. I say this on every video, but you need to be practicing your pronunciation, your reading skills, and not only that, your listening skills too. You'd be surprised how much you can catch by hearing yourself speaking in Latin. You'll catch on to the patterns, kind of the way that sentences go, the noun endings. You can hear a lot of that when you read it out loud. So it's always a good idea to read it aloud, read it to a partner, anyone in class, or even on your own at home, just to give yourself some practice and make sure you've got it. So once you have that under control, you can dive right into the story. But before we do that, I just want to come back and make sure that we have this new grammar kind of under our belts. So this is a recap of what you would have seen in chapter 7 in terms of grammar, the plural accusative. And a few things you want to make sure that you remember. A declension, right? We have 3 declensions that we've learned so far. It's just a group of nouns that have the same endings, right? They have a set pattern. We call them first, second, and third declension. So the pattern we're going to see in a second is that the first declension nouns end in A, the second declension nouns end in US, and the third declension nouns really can end in anything in the nominative singular, but they tend to use a lot of E endings like EM, ES, and we'll take a look at the chart in a second. You'll be able to see it. But make sure you kind of have that terminology down. And don't get confused. A declension is just a group of nouns. On the other hand, we have cases, right? They go together. So declension and case, they're related to each other on this chart. But a case is just how a noun is being used in a sentence. So we could use it as a subject, a direct object. There's a couple different ways we can use nouns. In English, what we're doing is we're creating meaning through word order. In Latin, it's not created through word order. It's created by the ending on our noun. So that's what we call a case. And the ones you've seen so far are nominative, accusative, and vocative. And in this chapter, you're going to see, I'll point it out in the story, the genitive case comes into play. But you just want to make sure that you've got those down. You understand the difference between a subject and a direct object, and you're getting some of the Latin terminology down. For third declension, like I said, the nominative singular has no pattern, right? No set pattern. So you're going to see on the chart that I give you in a second, I usually put a dash for that. Again, it doesn't mean that there's no ending there. There is such a thing as a third declension nominative singular noun. It just means there's no pattern. The chart is really just trying to give you a visual image of patterns in the language, organizing the language. And when you do that, the patterns are what we call declensions, right? In cases, it's just a way of organizing. So keep that in mind. When you see the dash, that's what I'm talking about. And some examples of those third declension nominative nouns would be words like arbor, tree, vaux, voice, nomen, clamor, mater, pater. These are words you've seen so far. They would all fall into that dash, that third declension nominative singular. So if we put it together, this is the chart I'm talking about. So you want to make sure that if you don't have this, feel free to pause the video, write it down, or one way or another, get it into your notes so that you have something to look at as you practice and as you translate. This is how we organize the language. We put it into these nouns into different groups that we call declensions. These are the 3 declensions you've seen so far. There's 5 total. You'll kind of see them as you go. But these 3 are where we are so far. The key cases that we've seen are nominative and accusative. We've hinted at vocative so far. But the real thing behind vocative is it has the same endings as nominative, except in second declension where the US becomes an E. So on this chart, I didn't put it because you don't see it a ton so far in Ecce, and we'll cover it a little more as we go. But these are the big cases that we're looking at and the ones that you've seen so far. So in the third declension, the real issue that you want to get at is the overlap of the endings. So the nominative plural and accusative plural are both using the ending es, and it's a long E, by the way. So just keep an eye on that. So I've highlighted it here and circled it in red. This is what we want to understand this chapter. How can you tell the difference between these 2 noun endings? Because nominative and accusative do mean different things. So if we know that we have this overlap in third declension, the question, like I said, becomes how do we translate? How do we recognize which is which? And we'll explain that right now. So the way you want to do this is when you see that es ending, look for hints in the story or in the line you're looking at to know if the word is either nominative or accusative. So basically what we call context clues. So if you look at these two sentences, in the first one you have pueros clamores terrent, and in the second we have clamores matres audiunt. There's a lot of es endings going on. In the first one, the key is to look at the endings of the two nouns, pueros and clamores. So clamores has the es ending, so we're not sure if it's nominative or accusative plural in the third declension. But pueros has an os ending. That's important because the os ending is second declension, and the only thing it can be is accusative plural. So if you know that, now we know that pueros has to be the direct object. It has to be accusative because that's the only os ending. So if we have a direct object, clamores is going to be our subject. It's not going to be accusative because we already have a direct object. So that first line doesn't say the boys scare the shouts. It's saying the shouts scare or frighten the boys. That's how you translate it. The trick is when you see two nouns that are both third declension plural, right? And they're both using that es ending. Now you have a little more thinking to do because you can't actually tell just by looking at it. You can't tell which is the subject and which is the direct object. Shouts could be a subject, right? Clamores. Mothers, matres, could be a subject. It makes sense both ways. So you have to look at what the sentence is doing. Look for hints, right? Your verb is audiunt, which means they hear. That's the big red flag. Shouts can't hear anything, right? Only mothers can hear something. So it wouldn't make sense to say the shouts hear the mothers. It has to be the mothers hear the shouts. So when you're stuck, just think about what makes the most sense. Use some context clues looking at the sentence. Sometimes it's easy, right? Like the example with pueros. If you know your noun endings, you can kind of do process of elimination pretty quickly. But even if not, just think about what makes the most sense, especially when you're seeing those two es nouns, right? They could be either nominative or accusative plural in third declension. Just use some clues and think to yourself, what makes the most sense? If you do that, you're going to come up with the right answer every time. So now we can look at the story and we're ready to roll because you have that grammar under your belt, hopefully. And again, if you get stuck, feel free to go back and watch my chapter 7 grammar video. It'll explain it in more detail to you. But when you have the story, now we're ready to mark it up. So we're highlighting it red with nominative, blue with accusative, direct object, right? In this case, I have the vocative in orange. There's one word that's vocative in this story, amice, right, down in the middle. And I also highlighted green for genitive. This is a new case that Ecce's introduced here, and they're hoping that you can kind of pick up the meaning without explaining what's going on. It's in that first line. You have Marci et Cornelii. So Marci looks like it would be second declension nominative plural, except there's only one Marcus. There's not two Marcuses, so it really wouldn't make sense to be a plural subject. Same thing with Cornelii. There's only one Cornelia, so Cornelii being a plural subject doesn't really make sense. These are what we call the genitive case, and it's usually showing possession. The easiest way to translate it so far, and there's more complicated uses for it, but for right now, when you see genitive, translate it of. In this line, you're talking about something of Marcus and something of Cornelia. Okay, but otherwise it's very straightforward. You have, just a little new vocab, some plural direct objects and subjects, but otherwise it's nothing you haven't seen so far and nothing you can't handle with the new grammar under your belt. So let's take it piece by piece. In the first part, you have in villa sedet vir Romanus nomine Gaius, qui est pater Marci et Cornelii. So again, in villa sedet, right, in the house is sitting. The vir Romanus is your subject, a Roman man. So you might translate that in the house, a Roman man is sitting. And it's a Roman man nomine Gaius, named Gaius, right? Who is he? Qui est pater, who is the father, right? He's the father of Marcus, Marci, and of Cornelii, right? You'll notice that it doesn't say Sexti here. He's not Sextus's dad, right? Sextus is not part of this family. He's a friend who's living with them, almost like a ward, you might say, right? Gaius is watching over him. You're going to see Gaius, the dad, is friends with Sextus's father, right? They know each other, and that's why Sextus is staying with this family. But in terms of our family tree, he's the father of Marcus and Cornelia. Then you have the next line, Cornelius est senator Romanus, right? Cornelius is a Roman senator. We've hinted at this before. He's a very important person, right? That's how they afford their summer home, and it references going back to Rome at certain points. They're a wealthy family because he's a Roman senator. In the next line, you have solus sedet, quod multas epistula scribere vult. So he sits, sedet, solus, alone, right, by himself. He's sitting alone because, quod, scribere vult, there's your complementary infinitive. He wants, vult, to write, scribere. right? So he wants to write multas epistulas. Here's your plural direct object. It's first declension accusative plural. He wants to write many letters, right? Those are the things that he wants to write. Then you have dum pater occupatus est, Marcus et Sextus et Cornelia in agris vicinis erant, right? So while their father is busy, right? Dum means while, pater occupatus est, while the father, pater, is busy, occupatus, right? While he's busy, Marcus, Sextus, and Cornelia erant, they wander or they are wandering, in agris vicinis, in the neighboring fields, right? So while dad is busy, they're off wandering around. Ibi multos servos laborantes spectant. So you notice here there's no word in red, which is totally fine. It just means that the subject is the same subject as the last line, Marcus, Sextus, and Cornelia, the last group of people we were talking about. So there, meaning in the fields, right, in the neighboring fields, ibi, there, spectant, they are watching many slaves working. You have multos servos laborantes, right? So multos servos, many slaves, is second declension, accusative plural. Laborantes is a little tricky because you might have noticed it looks like a verb, but it's actually acting as an adjective here. You're looking at something called a participle. Ignore it for right now. Just think of it as a vocab term. It means working, right, is your translation. But you can notice that it has that long es ending, making it accusative. It's going with multos servos. They're all accusative plural. Okay, so while their dad's writing a letter, the kids are off in the neighboring fields watching some slaves working. Then we have the next part. You have subito, nuntium conspiciunt qui ad eos venet, right? So suddenly, subito, they catch sight of conspiciunt. That's my verb. And again, there's no word in red here because we're still talking about the kids. Nuntium is the direct object. So again, pay attention. The messenger isn't doing anything. Something's happening to the nuntius, right? The nuntium here, the messenger. So they catch sight of a messenger who, qui ad eos venet, who comes towards them, right? Ad eos, towards them. Okay, so a messenger arrives. Nuntius ubi advenet pueros salutat. So the messenger, when he arrives, ubi advenet, salutat, greets pueros, the boys. And you'll catch here that they're trying to play on the idea of sort of gender roles in ancient Rome. There's a group of children, right? Cornelia is there, but the messenger doesn't bother asking her anything, right? The implication is he ignores her and he goes right to the boys, right? Sort of a male-dominated society. And he's going to ask them a question, right? You have a quote, salve amice, respondet Marcus, right? So he greets them in the last line. So Marcus here, respondet, responds, and says, salve amice, hello friend, right? And again, friend there is vocative because he's talking to someone. He's calling someone by name. And you'll notice that amicus, friend, switch to amice with an E. That's the vocative form of the second declension singular. So he says, hello, friend, right? Quem tu petis, right? Whom are you looking for? So another way to think of it, tu, you, is your subject. Petis means you are looking for. Quem means whom. It's a direct object. You can tell by that accusative em ending. But when you put it in English, you could say you are looking for whom, but as a question, you'd probably say, whom are you looking for? Right? Then you have Nuntius, Gaium Cornelium Peto, inquit. So the messenger, Nuntius, says, inquit. So he says a response, right? Peto, I am looking for Gaius Cornelius. Gaium Cornelium is your direct object. So that's who he's looking for, right? And again, because the name Gaius is second declension, you have second declension accusative singular endings, right? Gaium Cornelium. So he says, I'm looking for your dad, basically. Marcus, Gaius Cornelius es pater meus inquit. Right, so Marcus says, inquit, Gaius Cornelius is my father, pater meus, right? He says he's my father. Est in villa, he is in the house, right? Est means he, she, or it is. In this case, the subject is the dad, Gaius, right? He's saying he is in the house. Nuntium in villam ducit et patrem petit. So he, meaning Marcus, the last kind of subject we had, he leads the nuntium, the messenger, in villam, into the house, and petit, he looks for patrem, his father. So the messenger says, I'm looking for Gaius Cornelius. Marcus responds, right, as the oldest son. He says, yeah, he's my dad. He's in the house, right? And then he leads the messenger into the house so that he can see the father, Gaius. Now we can take the last line. You have pater inquit Marcus, nuntius in villa est, right? So pater, right, he calls out, Marcus says, inquit Marcus, father, pater, nuntius in villa est. right? So I'm noticing here pater would actually be vocative as well. He's saying, hey, dad, right? He's calling him by name. So pretend that pater is orange here. But he says, father, right? Nuntius in villa est. There is a messenger in the house, right? Or you could say a messenger, nuntius, is in the house. But either way, Marcus is calling out to his dad and saying, hey, there's a messenger here, right? A nuntius. Then it continues. You have Cornelius statum venit et nuntium salutat. So Cornelius immediately comes and greets the messenger, right? So Cornelius statum venit, he immediately comes, and salutat nuntium, he greets the messenger. Messenger is your direct object. Then you have epistulam nuntius tradet. So again, the subject is nuntius. That's your nominative noun. So the messenger tradet, hands over. Epistulam is your direct object. It's the thing that he hands over. So the messenger hands over a letter. Cornelius, ubi epistulam legit, eheu inquit, right? So Cornelius, when he reads legit, the epistulam, the letter, so it's kind of a side thought, when he reads the letter, he says, inquit, eheu, alas, oh no, however you want to translate that word, right? That phrase, it's just an exclamation, like, oh man, something's bad here, alas, you might say, even though no one really says that in English. Then he continues, princeps senatoris Romanos ad urbem revocat. So he says the emperor, the princeps, there's your third declension nominative singular noun. So if you're thinking back to our chart, this would go in the dash category, right? There is no ending of PS or S in the third declension, right? This is the dash. So that's how you know it's nominative singular. It just means the emperor, right? The emperor, revocat, is calling back the senatores Romanos, the Roman senators. So here's a good way to think about how we know what to do with senatores, because there's your long ES ending, right? Third declension plural. You can tell by the context clues. Princeps can only be your subject. There's no other ending that it could possibly be. Another clue is Romanos. Romanos is describing senatores. And we talked about in chapter 6 that adjectives like Roman need to match their noun in case, number, and gender. Romanos is clearly accusative plural with that OS ending. So if the adjective Roman is accusative, the noun it's going with, senatores, has to also be accusative. So there's another clue. The third clue is the verb. So if senatores were a subject, it would be plural, right? But revocat is clearly singular with the T. If it had an NT, then maybe senatores could be your subject. But here, it's a singular verb. You can't have a singular verb with a plural subject. So when you put all those context clues together, even though this line is great because it has so many third declension nouns in it, it has to say the emperor, subject, calls back, revocat, the Roman senators, direct object, ad urbem, to the city, right? That's what he's doing. Then it continues, eos consulere vult. He wants to consult them, eos, right? OS ending is a plural accusative noun. So complementary infinitive, consulere vult, he wants to consult them, meaning the Roman senators. Then you have necesse est ad urbem redire. So it's necessary, necesse est, to return, redire, ad urbem, to the city, right? So they have to go back to Rome. Eugapai, that's one of my students' favorite words. Eugapai, clamat sextus, qui Romam ire vult. So eugapai means something like hooray, yippee, whatever you want to translate it as, doesn't really matter. But sextus is excited is the idea. So hooray, clamat sextus, shouts sextus. Who, ire vult, again, complementary infinitive, wants to go Romam, to Rome, right? So Sextus wants to go to Rome, so he shouts eugapai. Eugapai would be the sort of antonym to eheu, right? Eheu, alas, eugapai, like hooray, yippee, however you want to translate it. Then you have gemit Cornelia, quod Flavia ad urbem venire non potest. So Cornelia, right? Cornelia gemit, she groans, right? Because, quote, Flavia, and again, quote is a conjunction, meaning you've got a separate clause, a separate, basically a separate thought coming after it. So that's why you have Flavia here as nominative. In the new part of the sentence, the new thought, Flavia is the subject, right? Flavia non potest is not able, venire, to come ad urbem, to the city. So you have a complementary infinitive again with venire non potest. So Cornelia is upset because her friend Flavia is not able to go. So that's the story. Again, pretty straightforward. The thing you want to pay attention to here are third declension nouns, right? Pay attention, look at all your noun endings, use this as an opportunity to kind of bring that chart together and memorize it as best you can. But again, the way you're really going to learn these is by saying the lines out loud, translating as much Latin as you can between this and practice problems, and really paying attention to the endings, right? You'll catch on as you go. If you need any help, just put a comment. I'll help you however I can. Good luck.